Welcome, Pitt fans, ACC fans, and in general, college football fans, to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. Of course, I'm your host, JJ Kitchen. Guys, the game, in my opinion, and I may be a little bit biased, but the game of the week, what college football is made of and what it's built off of, rivalry week, and it's the backyard brawl, Pitt versus WVU down in Morgantown. This Saturday, it's 7:30. Guys, before we get into the big topic, and more importantly, a special guest that I brought on for this because of his knowledge, not just of Pitt, but of West Virginia and the connections that he has to Morgantown, West Virginia, and the Mountaineers. Guys, before we get into it, please subscribe to the channel down below. Again, our channel has been growing because of you guys. The channel is not what it is without you guys. Cannot thank you enough for your support, the comments, the likes, the shares. The channel is growing because of you, and I'm truly grateful for everything that you guys do in making the channel what it is. But to get into it, guys, today's guest is a man that I really don't consider a friend. He's family. To talk about someone that's truly high character, intelligent, hardworking, great family man, incredible family to begin with, especially his two sons and his wife, but a true Pitt man through thick and thin, and someone that I truly admire and wanted to bring on today because of his knowledge of what he brings. And that's Harry Psaros, also known as the Pitt Guru, as Pitt fans know. Harry, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, man. It's so great to be here. I love what you're doing. I love a new and fresh voice in terms of a Pitt Nation, and I think I love what you're offering the fan base at this point. So really honored to be here.
Thank you so much. And honestly, it's been so much fun to talk about Pitt football and really just get a different perspective where it's more of just, not just the bad or not just all the good, but it's really everything in between. And everything's been great because of the fans that have been out there. But before we get into it, I really want you to talk to the fans about, how did you come up with the nickname Pitt Guru? Was it given to you? Was it something you came up with? And just talk about the history that you have, not just in the circle of Pitt, but in the terms of recruiting. Go into a little bit of a story about that.
Sure. In the history when it comes to Pitt, at least with the internet, I think I have a very special niche. I graduated University of Pittsburgh in 1996. And yeah, the internet was out there, but the reason timing was key at the time was people were really getting into it. It was no longer this big mystery. You could actually get on. So there was a big Wild West, Big East forum, a message board, and it was the centerpiece. Everybody would jump on and talk football. And it isn't like now where you have admins and things like that. You can imagine the hostility was crazy. There was a real finite amount of Pitt fans, and I was one of them. I grew up, and this is very relevant to today's discussion, in the steel town of Weirton, West Virginia. So Weirton is interesting because we're really right on the PA border, and we're 30 miles from downtown Pittsburgh, yet we're part of the state of West Virginia. So, my father and my father, George, who passed away about 8 to 9 weeks ago, and my uncle, Perry Psaros in Bethany Beach, Delaware, are the most rabid WVU fans you'd ever want to find. But they were recruitniks before it was cool, and they would monitor where players went. And I remember WVU had a D tackle called Theron Ellis, and my dad explained to me where they went to get him and why he fit into the system. And I guess because I'm analytical, I started putting it together, and I said, this recruiting thing is kind of cool. So I started posting on the Big East site, very relevant Pitt information. Pitt is after this player. I was scouring, finding newspaper articles. That's where my name came. So the people that were on the site came and said, dude, you're the guru. And it sort of originated there. I know people think I was arrogant and I came up with it on my own, but it was actually from those original OG Pitt fans that were on that page. So from there, I decided, why don't I learn how to create a website? I went and bought HTML for Dummies. I sat down, I coded the original Pitt recruiting site. I'm the OG. It was hailtopitt.com.
Oh my God.
For all the major sites that are out there. Now, the amazing part was it exploded. It started really growing in popularity, and I decided instead of just popping information or disseminating information, why don't I start making phone calls and interviewing players that they're after? And I decided at that point that I would try that. And I will tell you, now it's different. You're on Twitter, you follow the player, they follow you, you get the number. Within 30 seconds, you could have a number. Now, I have to tell you, it was far more difficult back then. You had to go through a coach, you had to go through an athletic director, you had to get permission from the parents. But I started building up a following, and it started noticing. And at one point, they got a hold of me, and I was actually receiving much more traffic than read newspapers. And at that time, like the Post-Gazette and radio and things like that. And it kind of built up my reputation. From there, I went on. One day, I received a call from Bobby Burton at Rivals.com that said, dude, you're getting like 35 to 40,000 page views a day. I'm not sure if you're aware of this. You can come here, you can utilize all the tools that we have, and you could start a really preeminent Pitt site. So, I went and did that. I was involved. I left there at one point. I was involved with Scout.com, which is now defunct. It's 24/7 Sports. But, it's been great. I've been involved with it in some way, shape, or form now for over 25 years. But I think what I did, JJ, more than anything, is I established the first site, and I made the internet relevant. And we could talk about it later, but I also made it relevant to the coaching staffs. I think they realized the power of the internet when it came to recruiting players. And for lack of a better term, I feel like I gave birth to a lot of the people that are out there now. We have some really, really talented people covering Pitt in the newspapers, people like yourself. You have Mike McCocan, Chris Peak, the Loyal Sons. I love what they're doing. I mean, you have a lot of people out there that are covering it. And to me, I think it's great because the more voices out there talking Pitt, the better.
And it's crazy, you talk about it to where it really did start with you. And I remember growing up, I told people, becoming a Pitt fan, it was crazy. It was kind of like during a UCF game, and I love Pat Bostic, but Pat Bostic, I remember that game through like 2 or 3 interceptions. But I remember getting on a tee and going back with my parents and going back home. And I saw a gentleman it was on a wheelchair, wheeled himself onto the tee. And I remember I was sitting there as a young kid, and he goes, young man, if you could only see what this school was back in the day, it would have truly been something you would have really seen. I'm not sure I'll ever see it in my lifetime. And I remember just seeing how just humble and the fan base and what it was. And then I started really coming around to when Twitter got invented, and really when that was on board. And then that's really when I noticed you, and it was before anybody else. I mean, you were definitely the person, but even then, just to pioneer what Pitt in terms of what the internet looked like, it is just second to none. I mean, you literally are, as you said, when the fans gave you the nickname, the Pitt Guru, you were not just known just between Pitt fans, but just between recruiting in general. Like you said, when coaches are reaching out to you, you're doing a damn good job. I mean, it's not easy.
And it was a migration. So the first site was hailtopitt.com. I was young and naive and trying to hustle. And again, because of the extraordinary traffic, Pitt got a hold of me and said, nope, basically said, we love you. We love what you're doing. Change the name or we're going to sue you. And if anybody Googles Pitt puts foot down on Guru, the article's still there. Chuck Finder, right about the time I married my beautiful wife, Michelle, who's a mountaineer, and I converted her, he actually wrote the article, and we changed the name of the website, and he tripled my traffic. I was like the lead feature in the Post-Gazette. And it really brought a lot of relevance, and it brought like triple the traffic to my Rivals.com site at the time. But, JJ, back then, I would go to the blue gold games. I would hand out flyers. I hustled. I did everything I can to kind of build it up. After, I will say this, Coach Majors was a wonderful man, Johnny Majors. Mm-hmm. But after his second stint, the fan base was damaged. And my thought was, my site could be a place where I could galvanize spirit. I've heard this all the time. They say, you're just a voice for the coaching staff. You're Mr. Positivity. And you know what? My answer to that? Hell yeah. If you know me, I'm all about optimism, positivity, and I'm all about helping people. And my thought was, let me try to make a positive impact. I have this tool in hand, and people seem to really like what's going on. And they were buying merchandise, if I could add that too. I still have hailtopitt.com shirts, vintage, upstairs. I don't want to get sued, but I do. And it really meant something to me. It still does now. To me, Pitt is family. If you, I have a tremendous amount of Facebook friends, probably over 3,000, half of which are all Pitt people. It means something to me. Can I do as much as I used to now? Be honest with you, no. I mean, those that know me, I'm on the board of directors for a multitude of places for special needs children. I founded an organization here locally for special needs children. I'm writing a book. That's a whole separate subject. So I'm pretty busy right now. Where I can, I'm always pro Pitt, and I try to help. And I'm still, I mean, let's face it, I've been at it 25 years. I'm very, very connected. You'd be surprised the people I know and the information I get. If I had time for a podcast or something else, I would. But I love doing something like this where I can still give back.
Exactly. And it's funny, at the end of the show, obviously, before we get to that too, I want to send you obviously condolences to your family, the loss of your family. Honestly, I think Pitt fans in general, we're sending our love and prayers to you and your family. That's number one. Number two, you talk about family, and what it means to be Pitt family and what you've been. But you have an interesting perspective. And before we get into it, I really want the Pitt fans to understand, but even the WVU fans are going to be watching this because I've built a great following between the WVU fans, but just being fair, being general. And I think there's a good number of WVU fans, and you'll see in the comments when this video drops. Talk about what it's like. You talked about, Michelle, who was a diehard West Virginia fan in the day. Talk about your dynamic of being from West Virginia and understanding the dynamic where you have people in your family that are WVU fans, but you're now a Pitt fan, and you've been a Pitt fan for how long now? What's that like in that dynamic to have that in your family?
So the WVU fans listening to this might be interested in this. Who do I want to win Saturday? Absolutely, I want Pitt to be victorious. But let me say this: so many people that have been highly influential in my life, my parents. My late father, who was everything to me, my mother, Mary Ann, my Aunt Pearl Tranto, my Uncle Perry Paceris, my wife, one of my best friends, Nick, who's had an extremely successful career up at Ford, all went to WVU. I wanted, back in the day, an urban campus. Ironically, we're going to talk about last week, I looked, my top two may have been Cincinnati and Pitt, with NYU thrown in. And ultimately Pitt. And I think the reason that won out too is I wanted to stay close to my beautiful wife. And that worked out pretty well because I have a ring on my finger right here. So, I grew up going to WVU games. And this is a true story. And this is really funny. And it was funny. We had a couple that sat next to us and we were at every game. Rain, snow, shine. We'd go down. There's a couple that would go. Now, you can't do this now, but they would walk in with a Bible. And they would always tell the security guards, we have this to pray for the team. JJ, they would sit down, open the Bible. Right? And we love them. We knew them. They were like family to us. Open the Bible. And inside was like a little fifth of bourbon. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I, and WVU fans actually may relate to this. Back then, they had those giant horns. I don't even know if you're allowed having them now. And I was little and you'd blow your brains out. But I grew up rooting for the Mountaineers. And, I was in an area, despite being very close to Pittsburgh, it was predominantly, still is. I'm the vice president of the Greek Orthodox Church in Weirton, West Virginia, loaded with Mountaineer fans. So, let me say this. And when we're talking about what's interesting is this is a brawl that goes back. Pitt started their football program in 1889. WVU, think about this. 1891. The first game was played in 1895. There's 70 miles separating the schools. Absolutely amazing. Now, let's talk about perception and reality, because I want to make sure to separate that. I want death threats coming at me. But we have to look at the cultural war. And the reason I say that, and JJ, you know this, and Pitt fans are equally culpable. WVU looks at Pitt as a bunch of city slicker elitists.
Yep.
And if I can use the word, assholes. Yeah. And when you go, let's flip around from the Pitt perspective, and they've been like lighting them up this week, Barstool Pitt, and that's what both the Barstool accounts are supposed to do. And all we look at WVU as a big pack of hayseeds. It's just now. Let me state: perception doesn't equal reality, and I know that. I just talked about people in my family that have been highly successful that went to WVU. But what makes it great is they've been playing each other since 1895. There's a visceral hatred. There's 70 miles separating the schools, and there's always been this unnerving cultural angst between the two schools. In fact, and JJ, I can't remember the year. If you remember, I think they fired him. One of the announcers at Pitt, this is an old Pitt Stadium, announced that they needed a Mountaineer fan to move his tractor, and they said license plate EIEIO. And it's funny. It was kind of funny, but I didn't think about it at the time. I'm like, oh my Lord. And the guy ended up getting fired I think he got fired for that. I'd have to Google that one.
He was. And that story is something else. I think it was in the early 90s when that happened. I think honestly, the reason I actually heard about that story was through EJ Borghetti. And people who don't know, in my eyes, again, a Pitt legend, associate athletic director at SID.
EJ, I can go on and on, but an incredible human being and the ultimate Pitt man. So I agree with you with that. But that's actually was at the game when it happened. So and the one thing I will tell you, I do a tremendous amount of business now in the state of West Virginia. That hatred for Pitt, I believe, goes above all else. Including Marshall and including Penn State. What amazed me was even when the brawl was off, and I'm going back 5 years ago, and I was traversing the state. And again, pardon my French, there's signs everywhere that state eat shit Pitt, even on campus. Like it's just rolls off the tongue for them. You know what I mean? So, and rivalries are what they are. You know what I mean? There really is. It's in the DNA. Once you're accepted into the school, I think it just kind of happens. My neighbor Chris, three houses up, is a Mountaineer. It happened very quickly with him. People just need to understand. It's funny. It's a long-standing rivalry. It truly is a backyard brawl. And I always find the cultural war equally as interesting because the fans scream back and forth at each other. And look, it is what it is. You're not going to have a lot of Pitt fans going down there because WVU fans have a Mad Max-like environment.
Yeah.
And that's been well documented. I know they might give me hell for that, but that's pretty well documented. So, the game this weekend should be interesting. And what I find fascinating in many ways is analyzing WVU and analyzing Pitt. They're almost coming in kind of similar situations. Both the fan bases are frustrated. Both the fan bases believe the teams won't be stellar this year. They almost mirror each other heading in. It isn't like one team's dominant. Probably, and JJ, you know this. I mean, the most the 13-9 game in all of those years,
infamy
7+ years.
Yeah,
that is the only game I would point at to go, that was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed in my life, because they were so dominant that season with Steve Slayton, Owen Schmidt,
Pat White.
White.
Just freaks of nature.
They were freaks of nature, and that team on paper should have absolutely eviscerated Pitt. And it's like the miracle on ice. It really is to go, and even WVU fans will say this, to go back and to go, how on earth did we win that game? Out of the 70-year stretch, that to me is the one that really, really stands out. But like I said, I'm really looking forward to this weekend. There's a lot to clean up. I'm sure we'll talk about it. Well, we talked about Cincinnati wind up being relevant to what's going to go on this weekend.
Mm-hmm. And I think honestly, it's funny. We talk about just the rivalry in general. It's like the best of both worlds. You're close by, even with conference realignment really ruining a lot of the rivalries that are happening nowadays. The viewership this weekend is going to be through the roof, especially a night game for this. Last year, it had over 4.5 million viewers, obviously here in Pittsburgh. But as you said, there's a lot of things to clean up. And that really leads me into the topic of what Pitt, the Cincinnati recap. And obviously this week was certainly one for the ages in terms of the Phil Jurkovec comments, the booing, things of that nature. WVU fans, we're going to boo you. If you can't handle, Acrisure Stadium, we're going to be able to boo you down in Morgantown. In your eyes, give me just to start off with the bad stuff first. What are some of the things that you noticed in that Cincinnati game before I go into a little bit? What are some of the things that you noticed? You know what? These things need to get corrected now.
Okay. And I have three. And I will tell you, there was a lot. But first and foremost, it would be the play of Jurkovec. 10 for 32. Let's face it, with 3 touchdowns was fairly abysmal. What confused me was, he would drop a dime to Kanata Mumfield, and then the next pass would either hit a cheerleader in the head or go into the stands. And in the second half, when there was, we had 2 opportunities to go ahead to win. To me, there were times, in particular with Bub Means, where he would throw the ball into the nether. There was like a complete either miscommunication or a bad read or something that went on. And we had so many squandered opportunities there. The other narrative I'm really confused about, I've heard a lot this week. People talking about, well, Jurkovec is better when he's scrambling and not a drop back passer. And I'm like, he was one of the preeminent pro-style quarterbacks coming out of high school. He's enormous. He's the size of a tight end. What are you talking about? Like if he's struggling dropping back, that's an issue. He is a little bit better scrambling, but I said this. It might have been a rough statement. There are multiple, I think I saw YouTube videos right now stating that what happened to Phil Jurkovec. In other words, he's a has-been. Yeah. And they kind of delineate all his years through college. There's a perception right now that he's over the hill, that really maybe he's gassed. This weekend is very, very important to turn things around. You need to get that narrative and shift it. If he replicates his performance down at WVU, that narrative may be solidified. And I really think if it goes that bad again, that we should be singing "Oh Canada" and consider bringing in Bay Air. So that's my 2 cents first.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny. You brought up Jurkovec. It was funny, in 2020, I mean, the people in the NFL circles were talking about a first round potential draft pick. Obviously, he lit up Pitt for over 300 yards when we faced him. Obviously, we missed a field goal in that game. Boston College wins that game. But that's really where it started, where he had a lot of potential. I mean, like you said, he's your prototypical, he's 6'5", 240 pounds this year. He added 15 pounds of muscle, which I think is good for his body in terms of being able to hold up, especially when he runs. That was one of the things I noticed. Obviously, I agree with you in terms of, like you said, he would have a throw that was just like, man, that's the Jurkovec we were looking for. And then the next minute, he would just throw something up and it wasn't close. And when I look at it, there were a number of things. Obviously, to the Pitt fans, I told them before, obviously, Twitter was eviscerating me in terms of, it's just Phil Jurkovec. It's just Phil Jurkovec. One, the offensive line needs to play better. Okay, obviously, we had a true freshman in B.J. Williams starting at right guard, his first start. Why they didn't start him week 1, I really don't understand that. I question that decision. But he's got the game potential, and now he has that experience, especially game 1 against a good defensive line, especially against the Godfather, Dante Corleone, and also, too, Briggs, who was extremely good this past weekend. And I think that was a really good test up front. So I'd like to see Jurkovec get back to what he was, because I showed a lot of film this week in terms of what he looked like last week. I mean, what he looked like last year, what he looked like in 2020, how he can get back to that. And 2, obviously, I'm not as worried anymore, but obviously the rush defense needs to get better in the game this year. And in the game this week against West Virginia. Obviously, West Virginia ran for a lot of yards last year. It was the first game of the season. It's almost like a back-to-back year type of thing where the first game of the year, the first half was a struggle for Pitt in terms of rushing defense. But then obviously in the second game of the year, Pitt faces Tennessee, holds them for under 80 yards rushing. I mean, and they were a top 30 rushing offense last year. That's very good in terms of what their rushing was. But obviously, 2, their pass defense has been just really good the past couple of years, especially how they handled Tennessee, taking them to overtime last year. You saw it this week. You saw they only gave up 125 passing yards to Emory Jones, which was so good. You love to see that. But I just want to see the rush defense come out fast as soon as the game starts. Do not have that lag. You can't have that lag this week. Show that you truly built off of that, what the second half looked like. Those are the things I really want to see really just get developed and really come off to a fast start and get those corrected. Now, in terms of the good things, what were some of the things you saw in the game last week? You said, man, that's something you could definitely build off of.
Well, and let me briefly add to what you were saying, because I mentioned Phil, and I said there were two other points, and you mentioned it, the erratic play of the offensive line. I have a little bit more faith heading into next week because of the senior leadership.
Yeah.
And, I'm really hoping they clean that up. And the other thing that you may or may not have mentioned, my third point actually was the run defense.
Yeah.
Kiner ran for 153 yards. Pat Narduzzi defenses don't give up that much. If you lose against the run on D, you lose the game, and that's relevant to this weekend too. But I'll say this. Let me say this first, more of a globalized statement. You get better from game 1 to 2. Obviously, that's always been the narrative.
Yeah.
I don't know. Call me crazy. I don't know if Walford counts. So if you're a Pitt fan, and this is hope, obviously, you're hoping now by WVU that they can clean up a lot of those items. So I just mentioned the erratic offensive line play again. You have a lot of senior leaders on that line. You're hoping they put it together. You have the erratic run defense, a lot of battle-tested senior defensive tackles. And yes, I know Cansey's not there, but there is so much experience on, especially at D tackle, lined up. Dayons was senior himself.
Yeah.
That you're hoping they clean that up. But when I look at Mumfield, when I look at Reynolds, in particular to Gavin Bartholomew, there's some positives there. JJ, the only thing that drove me nuts, and I'll say two things. You have gamers in Bartholomew and Rodney Hammond.
Mm-hmm.
It's inexcusable to me that Rodney Hammond didn't get more touches, and he is a rhythmic back. In other words, he plays better the more you feed him the ball. And the other thing that drove me nuts is you have Bartholomew catches 2 passes, we go in, score a touchdown, Frank Signetti yanks him after that, the next series. And I'm sitting there going, I believe in playing the hot hand. So I don't think there was enough Hammond. I know we have 3 capable backs. I'm not saying we don't, but Rodney is a gamer, and I'm hoping they just feed him the ball against WVU and let him get into rhythm. And second of all, Signetti is known for going with his top talent, feeding the ball to the talent. You heard that when he was at Pitt before. If you get a player like Bartholomew that's hot, that's catching the balls, and he's a mismatch, throw him the damn ball. I don't see it's easy to me. It's like it's not hard. So what I think, if you're a Pitt fan, there were some glimmers of hope on offense. They played significantly better in the second half of the game. There's still some questionable angles and areas when it comes to the safeties, the linebackers. But some of these are very young players. So what I'm hoping's a big word, but hoping to see as a Pitt fan, that going down to Morgantown, they tighten up and they clean a lot of that up and feed off that negative energy. They're going to get booed relentlessly. You can imagine what they're going to hear.
Yep.
So there's some of my thoughts. I'm hoping that some of what I said comes into fruition.
And I agree. And some of the things, looking at just the things that are good, like you said, I agree. Rodney Hammond's a rhythm type of running back. You want to get him more touches. I was a little shocked. I understand Cincinnati's defensive backs weren't great, but they weren't bad either. And they kind of showed that Cincinnati's going to be a decent team this year. They were ranked towards the bottom of the Big 12 in the preseason. I've got them in the middle right now from watching that defensive line. And I think that that's really battle tested for Pitt, because Cincinnati, in my opinion, especially watching those guys, Dante Corleone, the Godfather, he was, all Big Ten for a reason, All-American
as well.
Exactly. Their defensive line.
Two of the best we're going to go against. 2 of the best Pitt's going to go against. They were phenomenal.
Exactly. And I think that really battle tested them for this week, because their defensive line is better. I think, West Virginia has shown they got a good defensive line. I don't think it's anything like what they had last year with the Dante Stills of the world. Obviously, Jefferson transferred, went into the portal, went out to LSU. But one of the things that I noticed here, when you looked at the game, okay, there was 18 carries overall, but people were saying, oh, well, they only had 83 yards rushing. Yes, because there was only 18 carries. Each one of these running backs got 6 carries. Sebo Flemister, Daniel Carter, and Rodney Hammond Jr. Just to go over the averages, one of the really good things that I love to see, people were like, well, Pitt couldn't run the football. I disagree. Sibo Flemister, 6 carries for 38 yards. That's a 6.3 average per carry. Daniel Carter, a guy that's definitely going to get touches this year, 6 carries for 25 yards, 4.2 yards per carry. And then Rodney Hammond Jr. had a couple good runs there. If they'd have given him to him more, I think he would have definitely had more. 6 carries for 21 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. So they had at least had over 3.5 yards per carry. If you did the averages, they're at roughly 4.4 yards per carry on those. They can run the football. They just got to actually apply it to it. And I think that they wanted to come out and try to throw the football. I expect them to try to do that this week because West Virginia's defensive backs are a major, major issue this year. I mean, They were bad last year. It's becoming a trend now under Neil Brown and obviously Jordan Leslie's defensive coordinator at West Virginia. I saw his press conference this week. He said they're going to have, and Neil Brown talked about it, schematically, we're going to change things up. Personally, I think they might throw a wrinkle in there, but they're not changing their scheme. Because that would hurt them even more.
I can't see seismic changes at this point.
Yeah, you're not going to change. So you can't get your main scheme you've been running for the last 5 years right, but you're going to change it completely for the pick game. That would actually make it worse. So I think there'll be some wrinkles like anything else on offense and defense, but I think definitely they'll stay the same. But that's an area you got to target. And two, one of the things I loved, and this was an interesting stat, I tweeted it out today. In the first half, the Pitt defense gave up 180 yards rushing. We talked about that, how bad that was. Okay, and 93 yards passing, that was a good thing to see. But in the second half, and we talked about the 6-year seniors, Devin Danielson, David Green, Tyler Bentley, those guys are in there. Plus, you got DeAndre Joles, another guy, 6-year senior. You have those 4 guys on top of the guys behind him. You start to wonder, you're going to see Sean Fitzsimmons this week. Obviously, you still have Elliot Donald back there. We'll see what he does if he can get time in there. They're just so deep at defensive tackle with all the reps that they have there. In the second half, Pitt only allowed 36 rushing yards in the last 2 quarters and only 62 yards passing. If in reality, if Phil Jurkovec doesn't fumble, I think Pitt shuts them out in the second half. So I think that's what we saw. And that was the run defense that we wanted to see from the get-go, but it took them time to adjust, especially with the newer safeties back there. Still, our corners, MJ Devonshire, Marquez Williams, AJ Woods, Ryland Gandy. You love those guys back there. And personally, I love Javon McIntyre. This week, I think you're going to see Javon McIntyre and Donovan McMillan as the 2 guys to start back there because Donovan McMillan had a hell of a second half.
He really did. I'll say this because I had a couple Mountaineer fans in my ear, and they told me here locally, I was talking with them, and they said, hey, we came out. They had a rain delay at WVU and came out, and they did light up Duquesne. I think the problem, and so what they were basically trying to say is there's a lot of momentum heading into the Pitt game, and I explained to them that Pitt basically, although we lost, did the same thing. I agree with you. There was a lot of better play. They cleaned things up. I think WVU fan would agree with me. It's like Pitt with Wofford. It's hard to judge how well you actually did, when you're playing to the caliber of Duquesne. So it'll be interesting. I think this game will come down to who rushes the ball better. And the reason I say that in many, many ways, last year, WVU should have won the game. And his name is escaping me, the wideout that did the tip drill off his hands, and then MJ ran. Thank you. I knew he had a hyphen in his name. If he catches that ball, for all intents and purposes, that game could be over, and they win. So I think it's going to come down to who stops the run. C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White are strong running backs for WVU. Green is a solid QB. I will say they're having a little bit of the same issue Pitt has with their wideouts. Their wideouts are dropping balls.
Yeah.
I watched some of the Duquesne game. Walk-on who they did the right thing actually and handed him a scholarship. Hudson Clement was their standout, but he's like third team or he's down the depth chart. So I think the team that runs the ball, establishes the run, will win. And I'm hoping that's Pitt with Rodney Hammond. And again, we see a much, much improved Phil Jurkovec. And I think the one more thing that has to be said, or we'd be missing out. This is a big game for Neil Brown. Big game. Neil Brown has been trashed royally through the offseason.
Yeah.
WVU was picked to finish last. Many predicting his demise. If he loses to Pitt, he's on an electric chair entering conference play. I mean, that's an understatement. So that being said, we'll have to see how they do this season. I still don't know if he survives, but this is a huge game for Neil Brown. So that's another intangible that they have going for them, I think. Plus, the hostile crowd is going to help them to some extent. But again, that's my 2 cents. Whoever runs the ball, and I will tell you, WVU has Lee Cobb guy. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. He's an outstanding linebacker. Definitely their definitive captain. But again, it's going to come down to rushing yards. And at the end of the day, whoever wins that stat to me is going to win the game. It's going to be exceptionally close.
And I agree, honestly. The running game needs to get going. And I think if they establish it, they'll be able to do well. And I think they'll be able to get it going. Being able to be battle tested by the defensive line that I was surprised, again, was better than what I would thought it would be, between Dante Corleone and Briggs. The thing that was very noticeable to me is, I look at really West Virginia against Penn State. And like you said, if I try to tell people this, if you get answers of who your football team is against an FCS team, that's bad. Because what that means is it's more bad than good. And the one thing, I watched the tape. I watched both games, Penn State, the Penn State game and the Duquesne game. To be honest with you, I think the weather delay really helped WVU because it was 14-10, a quarter and a half through that. And Garrett Green, his intermediate passing game is struggling, to say the least. But he's able to connect on the deep passes, which was very strange to me. He actually was able to do a really good job. That's one thing I think he's actually really good at. But he's a guy that, during the Penn State game, when I watched a lot of that tape, against when it's it's Power 5 and you're facing Power 5 level, defensive lines, he was really a one-read guy and he would try to take off. So I think what, Pitt's going to have to try to do is, one, they're going to have a spy on him. Definitely. I would think it's Shane Simon probably in the middle is what they're probably going to do. But Penn State, they rushed for 146 yards against WVU. So, their defensive line, I want to see what it looks like. Obviously, they held Duquesne to what, 3? They had 3 rushing yards. Pitt held Wofford to negative 1 rushing yards. Right. So I really don't say much in terms of that, like you said. And I think one of the things that's very clear is, you look at the pass defense of West Virginia. It's a very big weakness. Again, you look at them, Aubrey Burks, who I thought was going to be, he had a lot of high ratings, especially from Pro Football Focus. He was really rough to watch, especially during the Penn State game. I think they really need to start utilizing the Pitt, for instance. If the pass game, to me, if Jurkovec's able to complete at least 55% of his passes, I think that Pitt wins the game because, one, I think that they're going to get the run game going. I really do. You look at the seniors up front, Jake Cradle, Blake Subovic. Then you have Matt Consalvis on the outside. Then you have Taylor on the other outside tackle. But in BJ Williams, I think his physicality, he's able to do it. We'll see if he continues to build off of that as a freshman. But one of the guys I really think about and I look at on the defensive side for West Virginia is, one, Sean Martin, the defensive end for West Virginia. I think he's actually really good. Again, are these guys, the guys I'm going to talk about here, are they as good as Corleone or Briggs? I don't think so, especially from watching the first 2 weeks. But the guys on the defensive line to watch are Sean Martin and Mike Lockhart. I think those 2 guys are, they're going to be the guys at the defensive line.
Yeah, Lockhart's stout. Yeah. He's a good player.
And like you said, the middle linebacker, who I think is the leader and their ace at middle linebacker, is that Leap Coca. I think he's a tremendous middle linebacker. Their depth, they don't have much depth there. They don't have much depth at defensive back. But also, too, like you said, the running game, C.J. Donaldson's their guy. I think that, I would hope to think that they'd probably try to get him more involved with more touches, especially for how good he is. But they do have another guy back there that I think is actually going to be really good. I want to see what he does. Actually, 2, Jalen Anderson and Jaheim White. Jaheim White's the true freshman that they brought in, really played a lot last week against Duquesne. Do I think he plays a lot this week? We'll see, especially how the game goes. But I think you're going to see C.J. Donaldson and Jalen Anderson really take more of the carries. But when I look at this West Virginia team overall, on paper, I understand why they're very confident, because the last game they saw Pitt struggle. Okay, but I don't understand why they're very, very confident, because the team that they faced, they lost by 3 touchdowns to. And I understand that they got that last touchdown late, but it was a second-team Penn State offense that was out there. They put it in. James Franklin doing James Franklin things. By the way, I didn't agree with that. And I agree. What goes around comes around. you know, and that's a whole nother topic about Penn State and, you know, not wanting to play certain teams. We won't say who they are. But I think I understand why they're confident, because they saw them play Duquesne and they blew them out. But these are very two comparable teams, you know. And again, you talked about, for instance, Neal Brown. I think they're putting a lot of pressure on him. And again, I understand coaching a certain game. And I think when you look at teams, you want to put it onto a game when you're preparing that, hey, every game is the same. You know, every game, it's an elite opponent. But when you look at how much pressure they're putting on, I saw some articles this week that, you know what, you'll basically chop the guy's head off if he loses to Pitt. I mean, you have to think
that's been the narrative right now. It's crazy.
You have to think that he's looking at those articles. Like, you can't avoid all those articles, and you can't avoid what everything's on Twitter, especially for how bad the fan base was just crushing him after the Penn State loss. I mean, nobody expected West Virginia to win that game. I thought it was competitive in the first quarter. Then after that, it started to break away a little bit. But when you look at them, you know, they were just crushing that guy after that game. You have to think what the pressure looks like. And when I look at these two coaches, you look at Pat Narduzzi and you look at Neal Brown. There's a reason Neal Brown has a losing record at West Virginia and Pat Narduzzi has a winning record. I think Pat Narduzzi, he makes the corrections. He's proven to learn from his mistakes. He's learned to be aggressive. I think Narduzzi's aggressive while Neal Brown's not. It cost him, I think, in the last game last year. We can't say if it would have helped them win or lose, but that's a big momentum shift. And you had a guy that rushed for over 100 yards on a number of carries, and you punt on 4th and 1. I mean, I just don't know
that. I mean, as a Pitt fan, I loved it, but it was inexcusable, you know. And two other tangential items. This is clearly a heated rivalry. I am hoping Narduzzi has them understanding that personal fouls are inexcusable.
Yes.
There's going to be a lot of talking, and it just takes that one push and 15-yard penalty, and that could be replicated over and over again. The other thing, especially Pitt on the road, turnovers. You got to be careful with turnovers and make sure those don't happen, especially sloppy ones. Like I said, we had the Djokovic fumble, but I'm you know, I really hope that they can be exceptionally careful when it comes to the personal foul situation, because you're going to have the crowd screaming at you, you're going to have the players taunting you. You know, just focus on football and smash the guy in front of you, as opposed to committing a stupid foul after the fact.
Exactly. And one of the things I really want to see too is obviously PJ O'Brien had a 15-yard penalty, personal foul penalty on the first drive of the Cincinnati game. You would think it would, at this point, you know, we're kind of getting over that, but we had that in the first game. But two, I just want to see what the defensive line, the offensive line does, because let me tell you, I do give West Virginia the advantage of the offensive line. They got, and it's really in the middle that I really look at the West Virginia offensive line, where you have, you know, All-American. I think he's an absolute stud, the center, Zach Frazier. I think he's an absolute animal in how he plays and how he's able to move people. I thought he did a great job in the Penn State game. But also Brandon Yates at right guard. And then I think his name's Thomas Remock. I think is how you pronounce it. Again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. But those three, you know, you got Thomas Remock, Zach Frazier, and then Brandon Yates. And then obviously you have Doug Nestor and then Wyatt Milam on the outside. I think it's a great offensive line that they have. It's a veteran offensive line. I want to see really, you know, Pitt's defense played really good in the second half, and especially the defensive line with all of our veterans. I really want to see how our defensive line gets after it, because you have to think that they watch film this week. You know, one, you know, clearly Pitt respects all their opponents. And I think when you watch the tape, and I've talked to a number of the players this week, one of the things that stood out is they talked about the offensive line, and they're gonna bring it. It's gonna be a very physical game. But it's got to be a tamed physical game. Like you said, you can't have the personal fouls. You've got to be contained to where it's one penalty that could really change a game. And when I look at these two teams, the one of the things that I looked at is had a couple players, I won't say who, reached out to me. They love how confident West Virginia is coming into this game. And one of them recently reached out to me and said, you know, we understand that we didn't play well against Cincinnati, but for a team that was 5-7 last year, has only had one winning season, and it was a COVID year, in the last 4 years, they really take that as motivation. Is, you know, hey, these guys are just doubting us after we were ranked back-to-back years at the end of the year in the top 25, just at the last game of the year with the team, really, the defense that we have now, beat number 16, UCLA. A lot of these fans from WVU, man, they're saying a lot of this positive stuff, like we're going to beat WVU really bad. You know, I think you'll see later on and during the week, I'm going to be jumping on Kuz's corner, who's a tremendous WVU guy. I think he's just so level-headed. I think he's incredible. He even said, it's going to be a close game. I've even said it's going to be a close game. But I think some of the cockiness of some of the fans, I think it's really rubbed off on some of the players. Like, man, they're really doubting us in terms of can we really win this game? Have you seen any of that in terms of what the WVU fans are bringing? Do you think that's going to motivate the players? Do you think it's not going to motivate the players? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of what I've read, they're actually predicting a close game, favoring WVU despite the odds makers. They're the odds makers are one thing. What I'm reading is another. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of that chatter. And I did hear from several players that were unnerved by what they heard. I think in many ways, I go back 25 years in the martial arts, and we talk about focus of the mind. I think it actually, in a weird way, maybe helping Pitt that this is on the road. If you're Jurkovec, you could just focus in on the people that are coming after you. You could focus in, forget about the boo birds at Pitt and all that other controversy. Just really focus in at the task in hand. They're going to be on an island surrounded by a lot of hostile people, and it's going to give them an opportunity to really come together as a unit, like the mighty Spartan 300, and retaliate. So. I have got that sense where I think there's been a bit overconfidence after the Duquesne victory. I'll take it if I'm a Pitt fan, and I'm hoping that Pitt uses that as fuel. Like I said, everything, the trends that I'm reading, if you look at all the blogs, things like that right now, people are expecting a WVU victory, a close one, but a WVU victory. So, we'll see. You never know what is in a team's head. I mean, we talked about the 13-9 game. I was expecting Pitt to be blown away. I mean, just like a 50-point victory.
Yeah.
And I sat there with my mouth agape, screaming like a madman after the game, just in shock. So it's hard to get in a player's head, but I think there's enough talent there with Pitt where if again, I see this as game 2, not game 2 to 3. I see this as game 2. If they can clean up what we discussed, and I really believe in the leadership on both sides of the line. There's a lot of super seniors that are there, things like that, that they have a very good chance of winning.
I agree. And before we get to the game predictions of what we think the scores are going to be, one of the things I love to see is the Pitt football alum. Okay, I love the culture that Narduzzi has built. Guys like, LaShawn McCoy, James Conner, Tyler Boyd, Larry Fitzgerald, guys like that have been truly incredible throughout the entire process. Aaron Donald, guys like that who tweet out hell to Pitt, and obviously beat WVU. Larry Fitzgerald was another guy who was just, incredible in his time against, the Mountaineers. There's plenty of good stories about him. I think you actually had a really good story about Larry Fitzgerald in terms of WVU.
Really just about Fitzgerald in general, going back, and it's very relevant to the internet and to Pitt. I was there when staffs were starting to get the power of the internet. And it's hard to believe now, but it wasn't a factor at one time when it came to recruiting. It was old school. You go with your lunchbox and you go visit the coach and you talk to the coach and you talk to the player. And Brian Deal, back then, Walt Harris's recruiting coordinator, and Walt Harris, the synapses were clicking. And they realized this internet thing is powerful and people are reading it. And quite frankly, they got a hold of me and said, hey, we got this guy out of Richfield, Minnesota. And I had to stop him and go, what? I'm like, we never recruit Minnesota. And they're like, no, you don't understand. I'll never forget this. They said he's franchise. That came out like that. They said, this guy is franchise. Do me a favor, show him love, write some articles. And I got to know Larry. I got to know his brother, Marcus. I got to know his father. And I have here in my study, I have one of the original VHS copies of his highlights. And I remember watching it and going, my God, this guy's the size of a tight end. That's what he looked like to me. And he could high point a ball better than anyone I've ever seen. He had giant hands and he would just grab it. And I was instrumental in terms of writing a lot of the articles. And I know they read them because the family would communicate with me. But the reason it's relevant in terms of Fitzgerald it was the first time I recall, and I feel like I'm a trailblazer there too, where the staff was like, holy hell, all the eyeballs from these young kids are on the internet. It's instantaneous information. It's photographs. It's interviews. And it was the first time where the staff started working with me, with the site, going, hey, you know, if you could put a few things out there. And of course, I picked their brain on some players they were after at that time too. You should, you know what I mean? But it really, really was relevant. And I go back when they played the Mountaineers, and the Mountaineers won. I went when Larry was there, but I'll never forget they had him like double covered. It might have even been triple covered, and he was still lighting them up. We still lost the game, which drove me crazy, but he was a freak of nature. But that covering, that period of time when they got a hold of me and we really start, you know, diving in, and I was writing a lot about Larry, was the first time where I think the synapses went off with the coaching staff. And I know he's at BC right now. He came in a little bit after, but Jeff Hafley was another guy that understood this tool should be utilized. And I communicated with him a lot. And I'll never forget, he said to me, wait till you see this cat I landed, because not a lot of people knew about him, this Dion Lewis.
Yeah.
And I was at a practice, or I don't know what I was, and he showed up in a Quadzilla. His quads are like this, and I'm like, who in the hell is this? You know, and so, you know, I credited that time, like I said, Larry helped me and also helped the internet and showed its relevance as a tool, a powerful tool. And if, you know, and now we all know, I mean, it's blown up like crazy. I mean, you have the major sites out there, 24/7, Rivals, On3. But really anybody. I mean, you have like, and I look at what Mike Vukovcan has done with Pittsburgh Sports Now. It's amazing how that thing's gone from the ground up. So there's so much interest in it. But at that time, no one knew that they could use it as a recruiting tool. And I like to think I helped kind of open the doors there.
Oh, and you certainly did. And it's crazy, just all those stories, especially just the hard work you had to put in back then, especially now, you know, now we have all the, like you said, the internet, Twitter, everything, phone calls, you're able to get anything you want. Back then you had to make phone calls personally to guys like that and bring out tape and bring out the VHSs. That was a good time. But again, that makes you a trailblazer in what you did. And it really, that's why they call it, and being called the Pit Guru just tells you itself. When the fans give you a nickname, it's a reason for that.
And I think I'm right on this. The other name on the VHS was John Stocco. Stocco was a quarterback. They were like, they wanted him as almost like a package deal. They said, hey, can we send you John? And if I recall, the quarterback we ended up taking was Tyler Palco, coming in the class. And a little bit of connection there too. My son plays for West Allegheny High School, and his number is 3. So he knows the tradition with that number and the responsibility. But it was funny at the time. I remember they're like, hey, talk to the staff and let them know we got this blue chip quarterback. And I think Stocco, if I'm correct, he ended up going to Wisconsin. Had a decent career. So so many stories. But like I said, but that one with Larry was pivotal because it was the first time I saw the synapses and the light bulb go off. And they saw the power of the internet when it came to recruiting.
Yeah. And again, just the film, and obviously, you know, I remember a lot of it, but not everything. But obviously with Larry Fitzgerald, just for how good he was and what he was able to do, that the catches against Texas A&M, the catches against WVU, just in general, and how great he was. It was a treat to really have him at Pitt. But that leads me to really what people are probably going to be asking the most, and that's the game predictions and what we think and who's going to win. And I agree with you. It's going to be, I think it's going to definitely be a close game. And it's honestly a coin flip for me at this point because of the questions on both teams. That's really where I have it. But in your opinion, who wins, and do you think you have a score?
Oh, boy. I'm going to, first of all, it's going to be a close game.
Yeah. I
think Pitt will prevail. And I'm thinking like 24-21. It's going to be, I just don't see a high scoring affair. I'm going to throw that out. It's going to be a squeaker, and I think Pitt's going to pull it off.
And it's funny, and really, I'm with you. I think with this being a week 3 game, and both of these teams involved with facing an FCS opponent, really only one really Power 5 opponent that they faced up to this point. There's so many questions. There's a lot of good things about these teams, a lot of bad things about these teams, but it's the backyard brawl. I don't see this as a blowout. I think this is going to be extremely close, and I'm really with you. I see Pitt taking care of business. I think Pitt finds a way, and personally, I think it comes down to the coaching in this game. And we talk about the run game, the pass game, exploiting players here, exploiting players there. The one thing I really think Pitt has on their side is the coaching in this game and the experience. I think Pat Narduzzi, for what he's been able to do in terms of what rivalry games look like, how he's been able to perform. Obviously, he won last year. Being able to obviously beat Penn State once, keeping games close, and just how the defense plays in general for big games like this and how they perform. I'm going to go 27-24. I think it's not going to be that big of a game. I don't think they're going to score as many points as they did last year. I want to see really, it comes down to coaching. I think it comes down to a turnover. I really do. I think a turnover is going to be able to change the game, and it's going to be a field goal that ends up winning the game. So this is going to be a fun game. I truly love having the backyard brawl back, and I tell people all the time, rivalries are what make college football great. You got to keep these games involved, and it's a shame that you have teams and universities like Penn State that claim they're unrivaled, but you have fans on Twitter going back and forth between schools. Right. And obviously West Virginia faced Penn State this year. There was really no hatred going back and forth. They were kind of high-fiving each other a little bit, and it really wasn't any hatred. This is where the hatred is. It's a backyard brawl. Right. There's city, urban, only a short distance away. There's no flights involved. It's just a bus drive right down the road. Fan bases that'll be at both stadiums. This is going to be a hell of a game, and really, I'm going to really enjoy this one.
This will be fun, and we'll see what happens. But hail to Pitt, and hopefully we're 2-1 after the game's over with. We'll see how it goes. But it's been a pleasure talking with you about it.
I know. Hopefully 2-1. And before we hop off, a couple things I want you to put out there. One, please give them, obviously I have your Twitter handle going across, but please tell them your Twitter handle, and please, when you think about your book coming out, but more importantly, the organizations you're with. I want people to know the organizations you're with, and if anything they can do to get involved in terms of donations, things of that nature. There's a great subscriber base that we have here, and it continues to grow. But one, talk about where they can find you on Twitter or anything else, and then talk about the organizations you're with.
Sure. First, if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at Pitt Guru, PITTGURU, at Pitt Guru. I have a pretty big following now. I'd love for more followers. Come on board, DM me. I'm not a bad guy, and we'll talk. I'm very proud to be on the board of directors for the Autism Caring Center here locally. It's very near and dear to my heart. Recently was on Froggy Radio here in Pittsburgh, 50,000 watt station, discussing it. We've now assisted and helped over 1,000 families. My oldest son is on the spectrum, and my goal in life now is to make the situation better for other people. That's part of the book that I'm writing right now. I'm writing part of it. I'm also working with a ghostwriter out of the UK. That's probably going to be coming out 6 to 8 month time frame. It's not easy writing a book. I plan on helping and changing a lot of lives with that, and helping a lot of fathers with that. I founded locally here. I live in North Fayette Township, North Fayette Pals. I'm one of the founding families. It's an organization for special needs children. We just had a great golf outing, raised a lot of money for that about 2-3 weeks ago. I'm president of Parks and Rec here locally as well. So all things social go through me. we do a lot. And I'm the vice president for my church as well. I was on the board of directors for Autism Speaks. Time's kind of restricted that a little bit, but I'm also involved in trying to help them, as much as I can. So I come from a family where my mother, my uncle, and my cousin are all in the Weirton, West Virginia Hall of Fame. My brother is an international, not just national, philanthropist, one of the most successful businessmen in the country, a Greek-American businessman in the country. Our belief is that you help people and you make an impact and you give back. If fans wonder why the Guru isn't writing as much as he has and everything like that, I've been pretty busy. On top of my son Max is receiving some D3 interest in football, which has been fun. We visited Teal, we visited Bethany College last week, and we got a few more visits set up. But know that this blood flowing is blue and gold. And Pitt is family to me. If you see me out in public, if you ever get a chance, introduce yourself. And but again, the Caring Center is very near and dear to my heart. I could put links up, and I'll probably put them up on my Twitter site if anybody ever wants to make a donation or just participate or donate to Pals as well. I'll put that up. And like I said, my job is just, in my opinion, if you're breathing air, you should be helping people, and that's my main mission.
Amen. And I always tell people when I talk to football teams when they're in college or they're in high school, we're talking to young athletes. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it starts with, who
Right.
you are as a person, who you are with character. And my friend, you do not like that. You are extremely busy, but you are always looking out for other people. You are always looking to help people. When it comes to Pitt men, and I always put that up in the we, not me spectrum, that amplifies you to an
Well, I appreciate that. No, I really do. I really appreciate that. And life is about legacy. JJ, really, and I tell my boys this all the time. Don't sit on the bench in life. Play in the game. You're never going to find me sitting I'm always going to be doing something, and hopefully, if I'm doing it, I'm helping others.
Harry, you're in the Coliseum, but not in the stands. You're in the arena, my friend. And I can say this. I thank you so much for coming on. This has been a blast. This is the first time you've been on the show. This will not be the last time you're on the show. I can promise you that.
I'm just going to say, have me on again. We'll have a lot of fun.
This has been a blast. Guys, again, thank you for everyone who tunes into this. You make the channel what it is, the comments, even the good, the bad. Again, subscribe to the channel, like the video, dislike the video if you disagree with us, comment below if you disagree with any of our takes or if you agree with our takes. It's always great. I love the conversation with you guys. And again, if you see Harry out in the street, more than walk up to him and say hello. He's the best of the best.
That'd be great.
Nicest person on the street. Again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Talking College Football with JJ Kitchen. It's always been a blast. But more importantly, as I tell EJ Borghetti throughout and through thick and thin, it's always and forever, hail to Pitt.
Hail to Pitt.
We'll see you guys.